All right, so oftentimes when we're live streaming, we're doing it from the same place all the time, a venue that we have set up and all our equipment's just there, and that's great. Sometimes, however, we need to take the show on the road, which brings a lot more logistical challenges with it. One of them that is no small challenge is how are you going to power all of your equipment? If you've got a couple of cameras, a computer, a switcher, whatever you have, those are all going to need power. Out of the gate, you're probably not going to want to use something like a generator when kind of normal household power isn't available to you because, frankly, they make noise and you probably don't want that. Whatever you're live streaming, you probably don't want something buzzing in the background. Thankfully, today, there's a new solution that's becoming fairly common, and we've got one example of it behind me. This is the EcoFlow Delta 2 portable power station, and it is a battery-powered power station, meaning it runs completely silently and it gets its power from its own batteries that you can then charge from home or whatever and bring with you. Now, in any of these sorts of solutions, the rating that you are most importantly looking for is the rating of kilowatt hours. Basically, how many hours can it deliver how many kilowatts or how many watts of electricity? This is EcoFlow's 1 kilowatt hour battery or 1,000 watt hour batteries. And what that means is it can deliver 1 watt of power for, say, 1,000 hours. Now, 1 watt of power isn't a lot, and if you kind of think in like old school light bulb terms, right? If we think about watts, that's what a lot of us tend to think of. This battery would have the ability to power a single 60-watt light bulb for up to 16 hours. Now, on one hand, that may not sound like a lot, but on the other hand, old school light bulbs are being phased out for reasons because 60 watts of power is actually quite a bit. You can do a lot with modern electronics with 60 watts or even less of power. So what we're going to do is I am going to set up sort of a basic live streaming setup, one that includes everything you might want to use if you're out in the world doing some streaming, some cameras, a PTZ controller, a switcher, and even a computer, so you're running OBS or whatever. I'm going to set that all up on the workbench, run it through the EcoFlow, and see what sort of time we can get out of it. First, though, let's take a little tour of the EcoFlow itself so you can see all the different things that it can offer you. All right, so this is our Delta EcoFlow 2. This is about $1,000 model right now. I actually got it on Amazon Prime Days for $700, so they do go on special every once in a while. But that's about what this runs, and that is contemporary with really anything else in this 1 kilowatt hour range. They all run about the same amount because the money's in the batteries, and the batteries just sort of cost what they cost. All right, so let's just take a quick tour of it. First, we've got our front panel here. You've got your main power button, your status display, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then you've got your front set of inputs and outputs. And these are, you can see all of your USBs. So you've got a couple really nice features here. You've got 2 USB-Cs that are capable of putting out 100 watts of power, which is more than enough to run any sort of laptop you might be running out there, including the higher end like MacBook Pros and things like that. 100 watts of power is a really good number. And then we've got some fast charging USB-As and then some normal USB-As as well. Around the side, we've only got the 1 port here. This is actually so you can hook up a second battery. The second battery allows you to have another battery along with this, so sort of additional capacity, some additional kilowatt hours. But the additional battery doesn't have all the inputs or the outputs or the logic board or any of that stuff in it. It's just a battery. So you can buy that at a lower price than, say, buying 2 of these with all the inputs and the outputs, because you probably won't need more plugins than this thing already has. What you might want, though, down the line is some additional capacity. So the fact that you can daisy chain on some additional batteries is really nice. These are cooling fans on both sides. You want to make sure you leave those unblocked. You're dealing with a good amount of energy here, so cooling is a part of it. And then around back is where we get the rest of our outlets. So you can see we've got kind of some standard household style ones. 2 of the 3-prong style, and then 4 of the 2-prong style. Down here we've got our DC outputs. So you've got this one, looks like your cigarette lighter, just like you would expect. And then you've got your DC power outs. Not a lot of devices are supporting these yet, but there are some that do. So you've got some DC power out as well, right there. And then finally up top, we have the input. So this is your kind of standard power connector and what you would connect to and then charge it off of a wall plug or any standard power source. You can charge the battery there. All right, here you have what's basically the circuit breaker for the whole thing, similar like you find like on a power strip or something. So if something goes wrong, you can trip that, and then you'll need to come back and reset it. And then finally, right here, this is a super handy one. This is your solar input. We're going to get back to that in a minute, but you can actually pair this with a solar panel. So even while you're using it, while it's discharging energy for whatever it is you've got plugged into it, you can actually be then drawing energy from your solar panel even then or any time that you want to. One of the features I like about this, if you'll notice, is that each one of these sections, the section on the front, this section, and this section, has actually their own individual power button. So there's a power button on the front that powers the whole thing up. And then there's individual power buttons for these individual sections. So if you're not using, say, the DC out, you can leave that turned off and you're not wasting energy, with all the electronics that are behind this. It just stays off. That is actually an important consideration when you're thinking about how you hook these things up. Batteries, like are in here, are DC power. Most electronics that we use, including all the cameras and the controllers and even computers and all that, are also DC powered. However, these style outlets, the 3-prong and the 2-prong household styles, are actually AC. So what this battery is doing is it's taking DC power, converting it to AC power so you can plug in standard household style connectors, a lot of which are then converting it back to DC power when it gets to the actual device. It doesn't actually make a lot of sense sometime in this way. It does make sense in some other ways, but it's something to know what's going on. Well, what does that mean? It means that if you can, you would be much better off, like say if you've got something powered over USB, to just go ahead and use the USB exits right here, outputs right here, instead of attaching it to the little power brick in the back. Basically, anything you can hook up DC, hook up DC, and then keep the AC to a minimum, because what you're doing then is you're basically converting DC to AC and back to DC again, and which each one of those conversions, you're losing efficiency and you are not going to get everything you could out of it. All right, so let's go ahead and power this guy on, and we'll take a look and see what the control panel shows us. So here we are. So that was just me pressing the main power button. None of the other power buttons are on, so there isn't anything really drawing from it right now. And you can see that right here on the main display. So it says 64%, that's how much of the battery is left. I've actually been using this for a few different things around the church, which has been kind of fun. It's actually come in handy a couple of times. But I have 64% of my battery left, which is actually a good number. You don't really want to store things like this fully charged anyway. So being down a little bit is fine. You can see it shows me how much input watts I'm getting. So if I had this plugged into the wall or the solar power plugged in, it'd tell me what was going input. And then I have my output watts, how much basically energy is it putting out. And then finally, an estimate right here, 99 hours. Basically, what this is telling me is it can keep doing what it's doing right now for 99 hours. Now, that's because it's not really doing anything right now. Once I hook a load up to it, because with the cameras and everything else, we're probably going to see a lower number when we start to see some watts actually going out to power the different things. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to power my workbench off of this and get all of the kind of devices on and moving and running that you would want when you are typically doing a live stream, and we'll see how that affects this readout. All right, so let's talk about what we have going on here. I've got two of my PTZ cameras hooked up to it. I have the PTZ controller hooked up to it. I've got the ATM Mini hooked up to it, receiving signal from 3 different sources, and then pumping that out over USB to the computer. And the computer I'm running is a small desktop computer, not a laptop with its own power. So the computer and the monitor and all of that are all drawing off of just the EcoFlow. And this is sort of, in many ways, almost a worst case scenario, honestly, because you'll probably be using a laptop that has some battery. You may be tweaking things a little bit differently. I didn't tweak anything. I just basically took the power strip plug-in for my workbench and plugged it in to the EcoFlow and then turned everything on. One important caveat to that is I am powering the cameras and the PTZ controller over PoE. Now, PoE uses DC power. What does that mean? It means that the network box that provides the network and the PoE is doing the AC to DC conversion once. And so instead of there being an individual AC to DC conversion for both the cameras and the controller, there's only one that is then powering everything. And that is probably giving me a little additional efficiency. So if you look at my box right here, you can see what it's telling me, that I am currently drawing right around 100 watts of output, which means that this whole thing, running OBS, the computer, the cameras, and everything is running at only about 100 watts. So remember, when I said a 60-watt light bulb is actually not all that efficient, which is why we're getting rid of those things, this is why, because this is actually a lot of stuff being done for really not a lot of power. I did a couple other things where I moved the cameras around a whole bunch. That really didn't change the draw. The motors that run the cameras are pretty minimal. Tweaked a couple other things, but it all stayed fairly well consistent, right around 100 watts, which is now what this is telling me now is I should get about 6 hours of use out of the system, out of the battery, with that draw of about 100 watts, which really isn't that bad for a 30-pound device that you can carry with you that makes no noise and is super convenient to use, and on only a 2/3 charge, to able to get 6 hours out of it means that probably right around 10 hours of live streaming setup with a full charge. And 10 hours is a lot. I don't know what you're streaming, but 10 hours feels like a lot. However, there is still more if you want there to be. And this is where this guy comes in. This is the EcoFlow solar panel module that is designed to go with the battery. So especially if you're say live streaming in an outdoor space, like an outdoor venue or something like that, you could actually have this guy propped up, preferably facing the sun, recharging your battery while you are using it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set this up just real quick. It's a nice bright sunny day outside today. So I'm going to set this up and that battery up outside real quick and just see kind of about what kind of input power we are going to get out of this guy right here. Okay, so I have my solar panel set up out here outdoors. This is the 160 watt kit, so technically capable of generating up to 160 watts. It's probably not going to do all of that. And don't have it set up in maybe the best way. It is also fairly bright, but maybe a little hazy today as well. But if we come down here and look, you can see I am still inputting about 130 watts, which isn't bad. I'm going to leave this here for about an hour and see what we get in that time. All right, so it's been about an hour, pretty much exactly an hour. You can see I'm still pulling in about 115 watts of input. Got up 10% from 62% to 72%, which means I've gained about 100 kilowatts of power into my battery with my simple solar setup here. That's not bad. All right, so the EcoFlow Delta 2 with the 160 watt portable solar power system. What do we think? if you want to do live streaming on the go in random places where you're not sure what your power situation is going to be, having something like this is a tremendous asset. As you saw outside, I was actually generating with the solar panel enough wattage to actually power everything. So the battery would be more for, if it got cloudy or if you went into the evening, or whatever. But being able to have fairly easily at least 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 hours of streaming time. I mean, you'd have to be doing some pretty fancy events or some very long events to need to go well beyond that. The other benefits of bringing your own power are also has to do with your equipment. You don't always know what you're plugging into in other places, what the status of the wiring is going to be, that sort of stuff. The output that these batteries are able to put out is an incredibly clean, incredibly precise power. So you shouldn't run into, any instance issues with like power surges or anything like that. It's actually a nice way to treat your electronics even better because you'll be asking your electronics' own converters to do less work if they're getting a better, cleaner power signal in from the beginning, and that's what these things do. A couple words of caution. I would stick to the major brands, EcoFlow, Jackery, those kind of ones that you've heard of. There are a lot of batteries in there. I mean, there's a lot of stored power in there. And the problem with like really the off-brand stuff that's just really made as cheaply as possible in China is that's when you start running into potential battery issues. You do not want a battery fire, especially when you're dealing with a kilowatt worth of power, which is a lot of power. So one of the things you're buying when you buy like the more name brand equipment is you're buying their quality control standards because they are trying to build a brand. So they want their brand to be known, they want their brand to be respected, and they don't want it to be seen as unsafe versus that somebody might be a little more fly-by-night. You may save a few dollars on it, but given how important these things are and how much potential, frankly, danger they come with, hauling around that much energy with them, stick with the name brands because their quality control is going to be far better. All right, so I would say that if you need a system like this, the EcoFlow is a really great way to go. This one normally is about $1,000. I got it on Amazon Prime Day for about $200 off that. They tend to regularly run specials. So if you can be a little bit patient, you can usually either from their website directly or from Amazon get a better deal. Again, on this one, you can opt for the second battery, which gives you additional capacity, no additional inputs or outputs, but you probably don't need those anyway. And that can be had normally for about $800. Right now, I noticed they're running a special $1,500 for both. So then you're talking 2 kilowatts of power, so up to like maybe 20 hours. That's not bad. One more note, when I actually unplugged the computer from the system but left all the other equipment plugged in, you're drawing about 50 watts, which is not a lot at all. You can do that pretty much all day long if you want. So if you're running a laptop or something that brings its own power with it, then there you go. You will notice the one thing that we didn't tackle or didn't plug in anything for was audio. Kind of the assumption is that you're either going to be taking a feed from a soundboard if you're like at a music event or something like that that's going to have its own solution for power, or you're going to use something like what I use here, a portable wireless setup. Again, they're powered on their own, and so didn't really accommodate for that. If you do plan on running, like say, a sound system as well with speakers and a soundboard and a whole additional thing, it's possible, but imagine that that's probably going to cut your power time in about half to do that, especially depending on how many speakers you want to run through because they tend to draw a lot of wattage. All right, so EcoFlow Delta 2, really impressed with it, really like it. Glad I bought it. I think I'll get a lot of good use out of it. And if you're looking for something similar, I can highly recommend it. Please, 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 if you are interested in that, use the Amazon links below to support this channel. And until I see you again, have a great day. Hey everybody, if you found that video helpful, please hit like and subscribe, and also check the video description for links to any products you've seen in today's videos. Doing that really helps support this channel. Also, don't forget to leave a comment with any questions that you may have. A lot of the content I do is based directly on the questions and the feedback you give, so keep that coming and I will keep making them. Thank you.